The Battle of La Rochelle. We've all heard of the Battle of Agincourt, and for sure, it was a lot more theatrical, but believe it or not, ultimately, it was much less historically significant. June 1372. The 100 Years' War between France and England had been raging for 35 years by then, but had entered an uneasy peace, one that humiliated France. But the King of France found a way to shatter that peace treaty in his favor by getting the Castilian Spaniards to join up with him. Charles V invited the Castilians to join the war and help him lay siege to the town of La Rochelle, a town off the coast of western France, at that point still in the hands of the English. For quite some time, the French had been liberating one stronghold after another. La Rochelle was next in line, and it was one of the most important. It was so important, in fact, that the King of England, Edward III, sent an entire fleet to keep it in English hands at all costs. Edward put his own son-in-law, John of Hastings, the second Earl of Pembroke, in charge of the fleet. As we shall see, there are differing accounts as to some of the points of this battle, although its outcome is beyond dispute. But in all likelihood, it was the English who reached La Rochelle first. As for the Spanish king, Henry II, he sent one of his most crafty naval commanders, Ambrosio Buccaneer. He was a man with some nobility in his family tree, but mainly what he had was a long resume, one that underscored his ability to understand an enemy and take advantage. And so, the stage was set, not just for a clash of ships, but a clash of ideologies as to how a battle should be fought. The English were sitting snug in the bay, but on the 22nd of June, Buccaneer got to La Rochelle. Now, the Castilian Spanish had a powerful navy, one very comparable to the English. And according to the English side of the story, they greatly outnumbered the force sent by Edward III, meaning the English fleet was heroically outnumbered. The fleet, under the command of the second Earl of Pembroke, probably consisted of some 35 or so ships, though one pro-English account puts it as low as 14 ships. What the true number is, we'll probably never know, but 14, by most accounts, sounds a little too low. Would the King of England have only sent 14 ships? As for the Spanish fleet, about 20 to 22 ships, mainly war galleys, with a few nails, meaning the English were hardly heroically outnumbered, and in fact, it was the Spanish who were outnumbered. Confusing, huh? And this comes to us from most accounts. According to the Anglo side of the story, the first attack of the Spanish was met with strong resistance, and they were repelled by English bravery. But according to other sources, what occurred was just a minor skirmish, to which Buccaneer simply withdrew from, as if he was just giving up. If so, this would fit Buccaneer's pattern of deploying strategy. He knew the Bay of La Rochelle well enough, and the difference between his ships, in contrast to what the English were floating, meaning he would have greatly preferred to fight the following day at low tide. So in all likelihood, he was just trying to lull the English into a false sense of security. He wanted the English to stay in the bay, instead of fleeing from it. The fact that the English did indeed stay in the bay is strong evidence of their overconfidence, because they must have outnumbered the Spanish. Although some pro-Anglo accounts do say that they were trapped in the bay by a superior Spanish force, and spent the night worrying about how they were going to escape the trap. But too many other accounts differ from this to make it likely. But no matter what, the following day saw Buccaneer return to engage the English fleet. Only this time, things would turn out a lot different. The Spanish admiral knew that twice a day, the bay saw its tide levels drop. The water level would go down to the point where your average galleon or transport ship would get stuck on the bottom. And that's exactly what happened to Pembroke's fleet. So it was here that Buccaneer deployed his secret weapon, war galleys. He had far more of them than Pembroke, and their shallow draft meant they could easily maneuver around the bay at low tide, attacking the English with impunity. The Castilian ships had a great height advantage, meaning the Castilians could rain down projectiles onto the English, while staying safe behind the raised ridges of their deck. The Spanish unleashed a fire attack, using flaming arrows and a few of these, bombards, the earliest known mortar shell weapons. They were most likely used to drop incendiary projectiles onto enemy ships. What few galleons the English had were quickly overwhelmed. And in the heat of July, it's not hard to imagine that quite a few enemy ships went up in flames. Accounts have it that some 800 Englishmen were burnt to death. No one really knows how long the battle went on for. But in the end, the Spanish victory was total and complete. Every single English ship was either destroyed or captured. Some chronicles have it that about 400 knights and 800 soldiers were taken prisoner, along with many noblemen, including the Earl of Pembroke himself. He was captured along with 70 of the Knights of the Golden Spurs, his bodyguard. Rare for back then, Buccaneer showed a great amount of mercy by actually letting the prisoners live. The second Earl of Pembroke was handed over to the French. He died in France a few years later. In the aftermath of the battle, Spain was left in primary dominance of the Atlantic, and it would extend that dominance across the Atlantic and eventually around the world. It'd be a supremacy that would remain unchallenged for over 200 years. To recap, the Battle of Agincourt may have introduced the longbow to warfare, but that was just another kind of bow and arrow, thousands-year-old technology, and it's for that reason that it didn't go very far historically. The Battle of La Rochelle, by contrast, introduced using heavy artillery in naval battles, and as we all know, that did indeed catch on greatly. In fact, it's still being used to this day. As well, the battle did mark a turning point in the 100 Years' War. From here on out, England's fortunes in France would go downhill. Eventually, Joan of Arc would appear, and the days of England's occupation in France would be numbered. I'll leave a link in the description to 2 different Wikipedia pages. The first is the straight English Wikipedia version of it, and the second is a Spanish Wikipedia page, which I have translated into English. Reading both is an interesting example of how, even to this very day, the details of this battle still differ, depending which side you're on.